The Quran is the central religious text of Islam, which Muslims believe to be a revelation from God. It is widely regarded as the finest piece of literature in the Arabic language. The Quran is divided into chapters called suras, which are then divided into verses called ayahs. Muslims believe the Quran was verbally revealed by God to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel, gradually over a period of approximately 23 years, beginning on the 22nd of December 609 CE, when Muhammad was 40, and concluding in 632, the year of his death. Muslims regard the Quran as the most important miracle of Muhammad, a proof of his prophethood, and the culmination of a series of divine messages that started with the messages revealed to Adam and ended with Muhammad. The word Quran occurs some 70 times in the text of the Quran, although different names and words are also said to be references to the Quran. According to the traditional narrative, several companions of Muhammad served as scribes and were responsible for writing down the revelations. Shortly after Muhammad's death, the Quran was compiled by his companions who wrote down and memorized parts of it. These codices had differences that motivated the Caliph Uthman to establish a standard version now known as Uthman's Codex, which is generally considered the archetype of the Quran known today. There are, however, variant readings, with mostly minor differences in meaning. The Quran assumes familiarity with major narratives recounted in the biblical scriptures. It summarizes some, dwells at length on others, and, in some cases, presents alternative accounts and interpretations of events. The Quran describes itself as a book of guidance. It sometimes offers detailed accounts of specific historical events, and it often emphasizes the moral significance of an event over its narrative sequence. The Quran is used along with the Hadith to interpret Sharia law. During prayers, the Quran is recited only in Arabic. Someone who has memorized the entire Quran is called a hafiz. Some Muslims read Quranic ayah with elocution, which is often called tajweed. During the month of Ramadan, Muslims typically complete the recitation of the whole Quran during Tarawih prayers. In order to extrapolate the meaning of a particular Quranic verse, most Muslims rely on the tafsir. Etymology and meaning. The word Qur'an appears about 70 times in the Quran itself, assuming various meanings. It is a verbal noun of the Arabic verb qara'a, meaning he read or he recited. The Syriac equivalent is qiyana, which refers to scripture reading or lesson, while some Western scholars consider the word to be derived from the Syriac. The majority of Muslim authorities hold the origin of the word as qara'a itself. Regardless, it had become an Arabic term by Muhammad's lifetime. An important meaning of the word is the act of reciting, as reflected in an early Quranic passage. It is for us to collect it and to recite it. In other verses, the word refers to an individual passage recited. Its liturgical context is seen in a number of passages. For example, so when Al-Qur'an is recited, listen to it and keep silent. The word may also assume the meaning of a codified scripture when mentioned with other scriptures such as the Torah and Gospel. The term also has closely related synonyms that are employed throughout the Quran. Each synonym possesses its own distinct meaning, but its use may converge with that of Qur'an in certain contexts. Such terms include kitab, ayah, and surah. The latter two terms also denote units of revelation. In the large majority of contexts, usually with a definite article, the word is referred to as the revelation, that which has been sent down at intervals. Other related words are dhikr, used to refer to the Quran in the sense of a reminder and warning, and hikmah, sometimes referring to the revelation a part of it. The Quran describes itself as the discernment, the mother book, the guide, the wisdom, the remembrance, and the revelation. Another term is al-Kitab, though it is also used in the Arabic language for other scriptures, such as the Torah and the Gospels. The adjective of Quran has multiple transliterations including Quranic, Quranic, and Quranic, or capitalized as Quranic, Quranic, and Quranic. The term mushaf is often used to refer to particular Quranic manuscripts but is also used in the Quran to identify earlier revealed books. Other transliterations of Quran include Al-Quran, Quran, Quran, and Al-Quran. History. Prophetic era Islamic tradition relates that Muhammad received his first revelation in the cave of Hira during one of his isolated retreats to the mountains. Thereafter, he received revelations over a period of 23 years. According to Hadith and Muslim history, after Muhammad immigrated to Medina and formed an independent Muslim community, he ordered many of his companions to recite the Quran and to learn and teach the laws, which were revealed daily. It is related that some of the Quraysh who were taken prisoners at the Battle of Badr regained their freedom after they had taught some of the Muslims the simple writing of the time. Thus a group of Muslims gradually became literate. As it was initially spoken, the Quran was recorded on tablets, bones, and the wide, flat ends of date palm fronds. Most suras were in use amongst early Muslims since they are mentioned in numerous sayings by both Sunni and Shia sources, relating Muhammad's use of the Quran as a call to Islam, the making of prayer and the manner of recitation. However, the Quran did not exist in book form at the time of Muhammad's death in 632. There is agreement among scholars that Muhammad himself did not write down the revelation. Sahih al-Bukhari narrates Muhammad describing the revelations as, "Sometimes it is like the ringing of a bell," and Aisha reported, "I saw the Prophet being inspired divinely on a very cold day and noticed the sweat dropping from his forehead." Muhammad's first revelation, according to the Quran, was accompanied with a vision. The agent of revelation is mentioned as the one mighty in power, the one who grew clear to view when he was on the uppermost horizon. Then he drew nigh and came down till he was 2 bows length or even nearer. The Islamic studies scholar Welch states in the Encyclopedia of Islam that he believes the graphic descriptions of Muhammad's condition at these moments may be regarded as genuine, because he was severely disturbed after these revelations. According to Welch, these seizures would have been seen by those around him as convincing evidence for the superhuman origin of Muhammad's inspirations. However, Muhammad's critics accused him of being a possessed man, a soothsayer or a magician, since his experiences were similar to those claimed by such figures well known in ancient Arabia. Welch additionally states that it remains uncertain whether these experiences occurred before or after Muhammad's initial claim of prophethood. The Quran describes Muhammad as ummi, which is traditionally interpreted as illiterate, but the meaning is rather more complex. Medieval commentators such as Al-Tabari maintained that the term induced 2 meanings. First, the inability to read or write in general. Second, the inexperience or ignorance of the previous books or scriptures. Muhammad's illiteracy was taken as a sign of the genuineness of his prophethood. For example, according to Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, if Muhammad had mastered writing and reading, he possibly would have been suspected of having studied the books of the ancestors. Some scholars such as Watt prefer the second meaning of ummi. They take it to indicate unfamiliarity with earlier sacred texts. Compilation based on earlier transmitted reports. In the year 632, after the demise of Muhammad, a number of his companions who knew the Quran by heart were killed killed in a battle by Musaylimah. The first Caliph Abu Bakr decided to collect the book in one volume so that it could be preserved. Zayd ibn Thabit was the person to collect the Quran since he used to write the divine inspiration for Allah's apostle. Thus, a group of scribes, most importantly Zayd, collected the verses and produced a handwritten manuscript of the complete book. The manuscript, according to Zayd, remained with Abu Bakr until he died. Zayd's reaction to the task and the difficulties in collecting the Quranic material from parchments, palm leaf stalks, thin stones and from men who knew it by heart is recorded in earlier narratives. After Abu Bakr, Hafsa bint Umar, Muhammad's widow, was entrusted with the manuscript. In about 650, the third Caliph Uthman ibn Affan began noticing slight differences in pronunciation of the Quran as Islam expanded beyond the Arabian Peninsula, into Persia, the Levant, and North Africa. In order to preserve the sanctity of the text, he ordered a committee headed by Zayd to use Abu Bakr's copy and prepare a standard copy of the Quran. Thus, within 20 years of Muhammad's death, the Quran was committed to written form. The text became the model from which copies were made and promulgated throughout the urban centers of the Muslim world, and other versions are believed to have been destroyed. The present form of the Quran text is accepted by Muslim scholars to be the original version compiled by Abu Bakr. According to Shia, Ali ibn Abi Talib compiled a complete version of the Quran shortly after Muhammad's death. The order of this text differed from that gathered later during Uthman's era in that this version had been collected in chronological order. Despite this, he made no objection against the standardized Quran and accepted the Quran in circulation. Other personal copies of the Quran might have existed, including Ibn Mas'ud's and Ubay ibn Ka'b's codex, none of which exist today. The Quran most likely existed in scattered written form during Muhammad's lifetime. Several sources indicate that during Muhammad's lifetime a large number of his companions had memorized the revelations. Early commentaries and Islamic historical sources support the above-mentioned understanding of the Quran's early development. The Quran in its present form is generally considered by academic scholars to record the words spoken by Muhammad because the search for variants has not yielded any differences of great significance. University of Chicago professor Fred Donoff states that there was a very early attempt to establish a uniform consonantal text of the Qur'an from what was probably a wider and more varied group of related texts in early transmission. After the creation of the standardized canonical text, earlier authoritative texts were suppressed, and all extant manuscripts, despite the numerous variants, seem to date to a time after this standard consonantal text was established. Quote, although most variant readings of the text of the Quran have ceased to be transmitted, some still are. There has been no critical text produced on which a scholarly reconstruction of the Quranic text could be based. Historically, controversy over the Quran's content has rarely become an issue, although debates continue on the subject. In 1972, in a mosque in the city of Sana'a, Yemen, manuscripts were discovered that were later proved to be the most ancient Quranic text known to exist at the time. The Sana'a manuscripts contain palimpsests, a manuscript page from which the text has been washed off to make the parchment reusable again, a practice which was common in ancient times due to scarcity of writing material. However, the faint washed-off underlying text is still barely visible and believed to be pre-Uthmanic Quranic content, while the text written on top is believed to belong to Uthmanic time. Studies using radiocarbon dating indicate that the parchments are dated to the period before 671 AD with a 99% probability. In 2015, fragments of a very early Quran, dating back to 1,370 years ago, were discovered in the library of the University of Birmingham, England. According to the tests carried out by Oxford University Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit, with a probability of more than 95%, the parchment was from between 568 and 645. The manuscript is written in Hijazi script, an early form of written Arabic. This is possibly the earliest extant exemplar of the Quran, but as the tests allow a range of possible dates, it cannot be said with certainty which of the existing versions is the oldest. Saudi scholar Saud al-Zahan has expressed doubt over the age of the fragments as they contain dots and chapter separators that are believed to have originated later. Significance in Islam. In worship, Muslims believe the Quran to be the book of divine guidance revealed from God to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel over a period of 23 years and view the Quran as God's final revelation to humanity. Revelation in Islamic and Quranic contexts means the act of God addressing an individual, conveying a message for a greater number of recipients. The process by which the divine message comes to the heart of a messenger of God is Tanzil and Nuzul. As the Quran says, "With the truth we have sent it down, and with the truth it has come down." The Quran frequently asserts in its text that it is divinely ordained. Some verses in the Quran seem to imply that even those who do not speak Arabic would understand the Quran if it were recited to them. The Quran refers to a written pretext, the preserved tablet, that records God's speech even before it was sent down. The issue of whether the Quran is eternally created became a theological debate in the 9th century. Mu'tazilas, an Islamic school of theology based on reason and rational thought, held that the Quran was created, while the most widespread varieties of Muslim theologians considered the Quran to be co-eternal with God and, therefore, uncreated. Sufi philosophers view the question as artificial or wrongly framed. Muslims believe that the present wording of the Quran corresponds to that revealed to Muhammad, and according to their interpretation of Quran 15:9, it is protected from corruption. Muslims consider the Quran to be a guide, a sign of the prophethood of Muhammad and the truth of the religion. They argue it is not possible for a human to produce a book like the Quran, as the Quran itself maintains. The first surah of the Quran is repeated in daily prayers and in other occasions. This surah, which consists of 7 verses, is the most often recited surah of the Quran. Praise be God, Lord of the universe, the beneficent, the merciful, and master of the day of judgment. You alone we'd worship, and from you alone we'd seek assistance. Guide us to the right path, the path of those to whom you have granted blessings, those who are neither subject to your anger nor have gone astray. Respect for the written text of the Quran is an important element of religious faith by many Muslims, and the Quran is treated with reverence, based on tradition and a literal interpretation of Quran 56-79. Some Muslims believe that they must perform a ritual cleansing with water before touching a copy of the Quran, although this view is not universal. Worn-out copies of the Quran are wrapped in a cloth and stored indefinitely in a safe place, buried in a mosque or a Muslim cemetery, or burned and the ashes buried or scattered over water. In Islam, most intellectual disciplines, including Islamic theology, philosophy, mysticism and jurisprudence, have been concerned with the Quran and have the foundation in its teachings. Muslims believe that the preaching or reading of the Quran is rewarded with divine rewards variously called ajr, thawabu hasanat. In Islamic art, the Quran also inspired Islamic arts, and specifically the so-called Quranic arts of calligraphy and illumination. The Quran is never decorated with figurative images, but many Qurans have been highly decorated with decorative patterns in the margins of the page, or between the lines, or at the start of suras. Islamic verses appear in many other media, on buildings and on objects of all sizes, such as mosque lamps, metalwork, pottery, and single pages of calligraphy for muraqas or albums. Inimitability and imitability of the Quran is the belief that no human speech can match the Quran in its content and form. The Quran is considered an inimitable miracle by Muslims, effective until the day of resurrection, and, thereby, the central proof granted to Muhammad in authentication of his prophetic status. The concept of inimitability originates in the Quran, where in 5 different verses opponents are challenged to produce something like the Quran. If men and sprites banded together to produce the like of this Quran, they would never produce its like, not though they backed one another. So the suggestion is that if there are doubts concerning the divine authorship of the Quran, come forward and create something like it. For the 9th century, numerous works appeared which studied the Quran and examined its style and content. Medieval Muslim scholars including al-Jurjani and al-Baqillani have written treatises on the subject, discussed its various aspects, and used linguistic approaches to study the Quran. Others argue that the Quran contains noble ideas, has inner meanings, maintained its freshness through the ages, and has caused great transformations in individual level and in the history. Some scholars state that the Quran contains scientific information that agrees with modern science. The doctrine of miraculousness of the Quran is further emphasized by Muhammad's illiteracy, since the unlettered prophet could not have been suspected of composing the Quran. Text and arrangement. The Quran consists of 114 chapters of varying lengths, each known as a surah. Suras are classified as Meccan and Medinan, depending on whether the verses were revealed before or after the migration of Muhammad to the city of Medina. However, a surah classified as Medinan may contain Meccan verses in it and vice versa. Surah titles are derived from a name or quality discussed in the text, or from the first letters or words of the surah. Suras are arranged roughly in order of decreasing size. The surah arrangement is thus not connected to the sequence of revelation. Each surah except the 9th starts with the Bismillah, an Arabic phrase meaning, in the name of God. There are, however, still 114 occurrences of the Bismillah in the Quran, due to its presence in Quran 27-30 as the opening of Solomon's letter to the Queen of Sheba. Each surah consists of several verses, known as ayat, which originally means a sign or evidence sent by God. The number of verses differs from surah to surah. An individual verse may be just a few letters of several lines. The total number of verses in the Quran is 6,236. However, the number varies if the Bismillahs are counted separately, in addition to and independent of the division into suras. There are various ways of dividing the Quran into parts of approximately equal length for convenience in reading. The 30 juz can be used to read through the entire Quran in a month. Some of these parts are known by names, which are the first few words by which the juz starts. A juz is sometimes further divided into 2 hesp, and each hesp subdivided into 4 rub al-azab. The Quran is also divided into 7 approximately equal parts, manzil, for it to be recited in a week. A different structure is provided by semantical units resembling paragraphs and comprising roughly 10 ayat each. Such a section is called a ruku'. The muqatta' are combinations of between 1 and 5 Arabic letters figuring at the beginning of 29 out of the 114 surahs of the Quran just after the basmala. The letters are also known as fawati or openers, as they form the opening verse of the respective suras. 4 suras are named for the Muqatta: Taha, Yasin, Sad and Qaf. The original significance of the letters is unknown. Tafsir has interpreted them as abbreviations for either names or qualities of God or for the names or content of the respective surahs. According to one estimate, the Quran consists of 77,430 words, 18,994 unique words, 12,183 stems, 3,382 lemmas and 1,685 roots.